We're going to go into a regulatory conversation with Mathew Lippincott and Conor Lally. So if you all can come on up. Mathew is a technical writer who has worked on building mechanical codes and policies for ecological sanitation since 2010. He led writing of the Recode, Model Code, IAPMO, ANSI, We Stand chapter on composting and urine diverting toilets and the proposed International Plumbing Code, IPC, appendix of urine diversion, which recently received committee approval for the 2026 IPC. No, big deal, big deal. Mathew is currently working with the University of Michigan's Food, Ecology, and Equity, designing circular nutrient production program on regulatory pathways for urine diversion in Michigan. Hello, Mathew. And then Conor Lally, who's also joining for this conversation and presentation, is co-founder and ecological sanitation planner at Nutrient Networks, a New England-based organization advancing the field of ecological sanitation. He holds degrees in watershed science and energy and environmental analysis from SUNY ESF and Boston University. Conor is dedicated to thoughtful management of water and nutrients to protect our environment, build soil, and support an integrated food nutrient system. I think you're at the right summit. He is experienced in the planning, installation, and maintenance of composting toilet systems throughout New England and beyond. Conor has provided services for LBC and lead projects, including Clamp Glenorchy, and the Omega Center for Sustainable Living. Previous experience has included design and project management for ecological wastewater systems, constructed wetlands, and sustainable land use planning, as well as the design and operation of full-scale farm composting facility. Welcome, welcome. I'll let you come on over here.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Mathew and I want to talk about regulations. There's a huge consideration in this topic. I want to start just by highlighting some of the challenges that these EcoToilet solutions can be a solution for.
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, sorry. This is not for this room, this mic, right? Okay, thank you. So what are the challenges that some of these EcoToilets could be a solution for? Some of these have been mentioned, but I just want to run through them. I think nutrient pollution is the driver. That's why a lot of us are here, why a lot of us are talking about this. So you can see all these, red dots are where there's an unacceptable water quality in the embayment requiring immediate restoration. Related to that, and I'm happy to hear that this has come up already today, Cape Cod is the sole source aquifer. So I think the flip side of that coin is drinking water. And so by contributing less nutrients and less flush water, we're putting less pressure on our drinking water resources. Also, the compliance and enforcement of cesspools and failed septics. So outside of the nutrient pollution element of this is just a homeowner grappling with the cost and experience of having to upgrade a cesspool or dealing with a hydraulically failed septic. That's an issue all on its own that composting toilets or urine diversion could potentially be an answer for some of those homeowners. And then there's nutrient resource management, right? So we already talked about this broken nutrient cycle. And so these EcoToilets, especially urine diversion, could help better manage that broken nutrient cycle. Housing. I'm very excited that this is a topic at this conference. I'm really looking forward to Talitha's talk later. This is huge. We're in a housing crisis. So lots of reasons for a homeowner to want to put an addition on or expand or change their existing house. They want to stay in their house. So if there's an issue with a failed septic, this is an example of a dry composting toilet, a Phoenix system. And so this was installed in a way that allowed the homeowner to add a bedroom to their house without replacing or upgrading their septic system. So they're able to make the argument in their wastewater permit that they were reducing their design flow. And so this is huge. You think of people wanting to add ADUs or bedrooms onto their houses for their kids, or kids wanting to put added bedrooms or ADUs on their properties for their parents. It's a huge topic right now. Composting toilets and urine diversion could be a solution to unlock that, and allow that to happen. This is a project from a few years ago we did with Ben Goldberg. So affordable housing, huge topic right now. This is out in Truro, Massachusetts. So it's a Habitat for Humanity project. Originally, this site, when they did the septic design, the site constraint wouldn't allow for that third house. By putting one composting toilet in that house, it allowed that house to be built. So it can be critical, these solutions. So that's why we want to find regulatory pathways to allow them to be implemented. ADUs. Talitha, I'm looking forward again to talking about this with you. These are a lot of interest around ADUs. Lots of different reasons. I think what a lot of people realize when they start to plan an ADU is wastewater is a huge barrier to even being able to do it, to the point where a lot of people have to abandon their ADU project because there's no viable wastewater solution, especially on a tight site. When I don't have my head in the toilet, I'm a builder up in Maine. I work with the Croft Group. We build high performance houses. We use straw insulation. And so often we think of that broken food nutrient cycle. I just want to add a loop to that. We can correct the housing nutrient cycle. And so we can use straw, an agricultural byproduct, as a high performance insulation, a natural material. These wall panels typically have an R value of 60. And so I get to build these beautiful houses up in Maine. Even when I'm building, my head is still in the toilet. So I'm thinking about these houses could have composting toilets and urine diversion systems that could fertilize the straw to build the next house. So how do we make this happen? How do we recognize these solutions? What are the pathways that will help us implement some of these solutions? So a simplified process here, you have collection, transport, processing, and beneficial use. In Massachusetts, these are the three main entities with regulations that apply to that system. Collection, so this is the plumbing board. Obviously, there's the plumbing code. The plumbing system in the house has to meet the plumbing code. You also have a site wastewater permit that's administered by MassDEP. Transport is typically under MassDEP Title V rules. Processing, covered both by MassDEP and MDAR, and beneficial use is under MDAR's plant nutrient rules. I will say where there's, oh, I can't go back, huh? Well, we'll get to that. So the Uniform State Plumbing Code. So as a starting point for this pilot planning work, we have the 2012 pilot project as a reference point. There wasn't a tremendous amount of participation, but it gave us really good data, and it acknowledged the efficacy of composting toilets and urine diversion. So we have that to build on. We also have precedents through variances. So although these are one-off approvals, there's still a way that regulators at the local and state level are familiar with what these systems are. And so, and some of the progress that we've made throughout this pilot planning work is at the recommendation of the plumbing board, we started working more directly with manufacturers and facilitating a process where they're directly seeking approvals from the plumbing board instead of us seeking them on behalf of manufacturers. So even though that's sort of added the legwork and time to the process, I think ultimately it's better because the manufacturers are directly involved in the approval of their products. So we were able to clarify the product approval pathway with the plumbing board. So we're working with Ken Peterson, the chairman of the plumbing board. And it's important to note that any plumbing fixture or product in Massachusetts requires a product acceptance number. Any fixture requires that. And so if you don't have that, you need to either install it by variance, which is a site-specific permit, or you have to wait for that product to go through the appropriate standards testing and seek approval. We're also able to clarify with the plumbing board that even though, and this is a process that Ken highlighted for us as a pathway forward, even though a variance is typically site-specific and intended to be a one-off approval, the plumbing board is willing to entertain a single variance application with individual participant addresses and system details listed as part of that variance. We're also able to, Abe showed a standard collection system drawing earlier, and so as part of this planning work, we also took that drawing and adapted it so that it would meet Massachusetts code. So we now have an updated standard collection system spec that can be referenced in permitting documents or in this variance application. Some of the remaining questions on plumbing board, plumbing code things are, we don't know how the board will rule on these individual variances or product submittals. And so we're working with, different toilet fixtures from different manufacturers have different characteristics. This one bolts to the floor, this one doesn't, this one has this kind of trap, this one has, so they're all different enough that the plumbing board will look at them individually. And I think that's the outstanding question is, how will they rule on individual fixture approvals?
Batch variance, is it by geography or by builder who could have units?
It's for the pilot project, so it's specific to that project. So I'm going to skip ahead to MDAR and their plant nutrient rules and fertilizer regulations. So in terms of a starting point for the pilot work, we had some interagency discussions with them years ago, and I think what really helped was all of the questions from DEP and MDAR that came up about PFAS, nutrient content, pharmaceuticals, the fact that Rich Earth has done so much research and we were able to work with Abe to provide them data and resources on all of their concerns, I think really primed the conversation that we've had with them for this pilot, so that they're more comfortable with the concept of urine diversion, and we've provided that data already. And we've established through those conversations, there was already an understanding of what the plant nutrient rules were and what the fertilizer regulations, what those were. In terms of this pilot planning work, over the course of this planning work, we now have 2 fertilizer products registered, one from Rich Earth and one from Wasted. That's huge. I did not think we would see that during this project. So that's awesome. So we've clarified a pathway for fertilizer manufacturer licenses through MDAR and a pathway for fertilizer product registration. I think remaining questions are overlap with DEP, and wherever you have that question of dual jurisdiction, there's questions of when does urine stop being a black water and start being a fertilizer? Is it it goes into the pasteurizer as a black water and it comes out of the pasteurizer as a fertilizer? I think that makes sense, but how does that fit within a regulatory framework? There's some questions around that. Same with the plumbing board, the plumbing code, and Title V by DEP. There's questions, technically the jurisdiction of the plumbing code is anything within the house and 10 feet out. And from that point on, it's the septic, which is Title V jurisdiction. In reality, and in conversations with DEP, I think it's more along the lines of the plumbing board has jurisdiction over the pipes and the things in the house. DEP has jurisdiction over 10 feet out in the septic system, but also the contents of what's in the pipes in the house. So that can kind of complicate conversations around jurisdiction and clarifying, who has say over, the specifics of the pilot and agreements for participants. So MassDEP, I think this has probably taken the most amount of the team's time to engage with MassDEP. Lots of just questions about how this pilot could be, how we could seek approval for the pilot. I have to say, one difference between this process, this pilot planning process, and several years ago, is just the tone of the conversation with regulators has changed. I think regulators are now recognizing this as a legitimate solution. And I really have to give a lot of credit to MassDEP for putting so much time and attention and resources to researching this topic and advocating. I think MassDEP is so well respected and regarded by state regulators that it has sent a huge signal that this is a real solution to take seriously. And compared to a few years ago, I've seen a huge change in just how state regulators are talking about this. And it seems like they've gone from a perspective of questioning if anyone would really even want one of these systems to a perspective of how can we creatively find approval pathways and regulatory pathways or permit pathways to make this happen. So I think there's been a sea change at the regulatory level, and I think a lot of that has to do with MassDEP being such a playing a key role in those conversations. So in terms of where we started, a starting point, composting toilets are allowed in Title V. Gray water is allowed in Title V. We have the precedent of the 2012 EcoToilet study. Again, it wasn't tremendous participation, but it established a baseline. And again, it acknowledged efficacy of urine diversion and composting toilets. I think two of the key successes of the pilot planning phase have been clarifying the IA approval pathway. So in Massachusetts, innovative alternative systems go through a process of approval where they work through 3 tiers of piloting, provisional, and general use. The ultimate goal is for these systems to be general use approved so that anyone can install them without special permitting or jumping through more hoops. I think the challenge is that the term urine diversion means different things, right? It's not singular. It's also not a proprietary technology. So the IA approval process is set up for private entities with a proprietary treatment system to test their systems and generate data and get approval so that they can commercialize and sell those systems. Urine diversion doesn't work the same way. It's more of a methodology, right? And so we say urine diversion, but it can mean different things. It's different toilet manufacturers. You've urine diverting flush toilets, urine diverting dry toilets, urine diverting vacuum toilets. You have a standard collection tank that's not proprietary. The main driver of treating that urine is a hauler and a processing facility. And so it doesn't quite fit with the conventional framework of IA approvals. And so that's been somewhat challenging in terms of working with DEP to identify a pathway and who holds the permit, who is responsible for this technology. That means lots of different things, and how are we defining it, and what's included and what's not. So I think that's been one of the more challenging things to work through with DEP. And then the other huge success, I think a breakthrough in terms of regulations on this topic is the watershed accounting method. And so again, typical IA, you generate data and there's a nutrient removal rate assigned to that technology. And I think when we started talking about urine diversion on behalf of the town is really interested in knowing, okay, we have our watershed permit. They saw it as an investment. So if we're going to invest money into urine diversion, how do we get credit for that in our watershed permit? And I think the team, quickly recognized the best way to glean the most value from urine diversion is to account for it at the watershed scale, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. How much nitrogen you're removing from the watershed. And what's unique about a urine diverting system is you can quantify it. That's built into the process. You're pumping liquid urine out of tanks, and you can point and say, we've diverted X amount of gallons at this concentration. And so it lends itself to direct measurement and direct accounting. And so I think one of the highlights of this process is working with DEP to work out the details of watershed scale accounting of diverted nutrients. And what that does is it allows us to get away from site-specific nutrient removal, where there are questions of, I think it was brought up, do you convert all the bathrooms in a house or just one or some or all, which can really change the cost, right? We're talking about dollars per pounds of nitrogen removed. It's much more expensive typically to retrofit an upstairs bathroom in addition to a first floor bathroom, right? So one of the things this watershed scale accounting method does is it allows us to target the low-hanging fruit, right? And all that matters is how much urine is being diverted, not necessarily how much per household is being diverted. And so you can implement this throughout the watershed for a lower price point and divert more nutrients. So I think that's been a highlight of this process. Remaining questions with DEP, I think, are around if groundwater discharge permits apply to the processing or beneficial use component. That remains unclear. And then the big question is clarifying a pathway from IA provisional approval to general use, because that's the ultimate goal. And so some of the potential options for achieving general use would be, working it through the IA provisional use path with MassDEP as a potential permit holder for all of these installations. And then after a certain amount of years and data and review by DEP, it would be classified as available for general use. Another option would be if urine diversion would be regulated under the existing rules in Title V, more akin to how composting toilets are regulated, with urine being treated as a liquid byproduct, which is already in Title V. Number 3 is related to that in that to do that may require a rule change, which we're starting to have conversations about that. Typically takes 2 years to do a rule change, so it's time, but that would codify urine diversion specifically in Title V. Fourth path is through national standards development. I'm going to leave that topic to Mathew to talk about. But that's the overview of where we're at with regulations. Are we doing questions at the end or no?
I think, questions at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Say one more thing. Another benefit of the watershed scale accounting, going back to Abe's slide about that range of costs. I think another benefit of the watershed scale accounting is it might allow us to push the dollars per pound more towards that 73 number rather than the 317 number, because you can go for the lower cost bathroom installations across more homes.
All right, I'm going to pick up where Conor left off and try to come up with, try to go over a few different places where you can engage on normalizing source separation in Massachusetts that have come up through this engagement with Falmouth on the pilot with MassTC, and actually in some cases through our work in Michigan. So the first thing I want to give is a very broad view. We've touched on this through Abe's presentation, through Conor's presentation, but there has to always be a bridge between the on-site rules and the nitrogen reduction limits that waterways have, because we have two different standards that you kind of have to make this sort of a policy kludge between them. In Title V, everything's concentration based. So it's milligrams per liter of nitrogen. When you get to the watershed plans, it's weight-based. It's pounds of nitrogen. And conversion between SI units and US customary is not the problem here. So the problem is that the concentration-based standards assume all the nutrients are leaving the house in a single wastewater stream. And all the on-site systems are going to discharge those nutrients to groundwater. They aren't necessarily going to put them into like a biologically active layer of the soil. And so these assumptions, which aren't written into the rules, but are kind of before the rules, create the necessity of various kludges between our source separation systems and the watershed management plans. And so there is a bridge right now. Your Title V system they're going to establish a standardized weight based on an assessment of the concentration that's expected from the system, the amount of wastewater that's coming out, the number of residents of the home, and then they're going to apply that to each system in the watershed. But again, this depends on those assumptions of having everything go out the single wastewater stream. And so in our work with the Falmouth pilot, we proposed that, why don't we just collect the urine and measure the weight of the nitrogen removed? It's very straightforward concept, but it requires this new policy bridge. And so I want you to be thinking at that level of like, okay, as each of these source separation systems go in, what is this bridge going to be between these two different ways of dealing with nitrogen? And so, yeah, let's talk about a couple future pathways. One issue that has come up is this open question of whether your on-site system has a public benefit. I think it's pretty obvious that not polluting has a public benefit, but there might be some people who disagree, and so it would be nice to clarify that. And different legislation has clarified public versus private benefit for other technologies in Massachusetts. So you can get support to insulate your home because the state of Massachusetts has decided that having a well-insulated home, having a heat pump, having efficient home heating has a public benefit. And right now, the Greater Boston Plumbing Contractors Association, which represents union plumbing contractors, has a Bill S-591 in front of the legislature that's encouraging large buildings with more than 3,000 gallons a day of flow, to have water reuse systems, gray water reuse in the building or outside. And I got a chance to talk to Andrew D'Angelo, who's the executive director at the UA, the Plumbers Union annual training program. And we were talking that they support in principle this idea of a public benefit to on-site systems. And so this is engaging with legislatures about this in Massachusetts and clarifying this rule would help public dollars get spent on on-site treatment. And I think that that's important, because we can spend the public dollars on the sewer, but there might be, someone could come up with a lawsuit against your on-site system if you were to get public money. So this is a great place to engage and clarify those rules so that you can spend your money in the most reasonable way on treatment systems. Another would be to promote source separation generally in the regulations. And this doesn't necessarily mean a regulatory change. There is one regulation that I find very fascinating, which is that you can increase the occupancy of your home if you install a composting toilet, which means that on some level, DEP thinks that there is a reduced pollution burden if there's a composting toilet installed. But composting toilets aren't on the IA list. So it's up to DEP to clarify whether these systems are actually considered nitrogen-reducing systems. Because for the purposes of occupancy, they're nitrogen-reducing systems. For the purpose of watershed planning, they're not currently being considered. And so that is more of a policy interpretation that needs to happen, and someone could make a letter-writing campaign about that. There's also the opportunity to participate in some national standards. We're here at MassTC. They're one of the U.S.'s biggest testers of on-site systems and certification to standards by NSF International. And NSF International has a number of these standards for different types of systems. And they, 3 weeks ago, put out a call for committee members. It's an open call. These are ANSI standards. So anybody is allowed to register as an interested party and join these processes. So if you email standards@nsf.org, you could find yourself in endless Zoom meetings for the next 2 years. And I highly encourage you to do that. It will be a completely uncompensated position. So, and I have some ideas about this, but I'm not exactly sure how we would make urine diversion, these composting toilet rules change, but there's an opportunity to at least engage on these standards committees and try to get on the level of certification some more options. And we can also support rulemaking for source-separated treatment facilities. Right now, Wasted has been in discussions with DEP around a urine treatment facility. This will affect whether MassTC is going to, how will a treatment of urine be treated from a regulatory perspective? What kind of a product is it? What is this facility under Massachusetts rules? And so DEP is in the midst of doing a rulemaking around this, and it will be really important to make sure that they write rules that involve an appropriate amount of oversight, but also not an oppressive amount of oversight, and then also making sure that MDAR licensed fertilizers should be the output. On the fertilizer side, our team has been working on an application to the the American Association of Plant Food Control Officials to define urine as a ingredient for fertilizers. I would like to send that out on Friday, so if anyone would like to come to talk to me about that, there are a couple different things around testing, some very specific laboratory issues I would love to finalize there. And I also want to mention and use this as an opportunity to talk about the importance of local projects nationally, because AFCO is this association of state fertilizer regulators. They're the people who license fertilizers on a state-by-state basis. There's no national fertilizer regulatory program, and so the state regulators have created this agency to coordinate. And when we filed an application in Michigan to treat urine, our pasteurized urine, as a fertilizer, and received that license, which was the first in the U.S. for just a straight pasteurized urine product to be recognized as a licensed fertilizer. Our regulators, Keith Bauer and Jared Fletcher, they worked with us to make that happen. And so when Rich Earth emailed about trying to license a fertilizer in New Hampshire and then again in Massachusetts, regulators in these states emailed the private list that AFCO runs for state fertilizer regulators. And our state fertilizer regulators, Jared and Keith, supported those applications. And so that assisted Rich Earth here in Massachusetts in getting their licenses. So, you may be thinking everything is very local to Cape Cod, but the work you do with regulators here, the work you do on your licensing here, can help establish precedents that can be used in other states. And I guess we have time for questions. So we have 5 minutes, and yeah, Conor, when you come up, then we can talk more. Also, I want to encourage, all of these rules came out of working with a lot of different people, and I want to encourage you to join the group that Julia Kavicki and I run with Rich Earth, which is the EcoSand permitting group, to talk about permitting projects nationally. So, thank you.
We'll start with Arthur.
Thanks. I was just, Conor, I was hoping you could just, for everybody, clarify. You talked in the DEP part of your presentation, you talked about clarifying the IA pathway, but I feel like it didn't quite come through what that pathway looks like. You were talking about the progress on that pathway, and I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't totally sure where that landed in terms of what you said. So.
Another question.
I was just hoping either of you could speak to where we're at with fixtures approvals here in the U.S., like status update.
There are no approved fixtures in the United States to the ASME standard. However, I believe there may be some major fixture manufacturers working on that. So hopefully that will change soon.
Yeah, and just to make a comment on that, a lot of these fixtures that we're talking about, we've installed in Massachusetts, but they were installed with plumbing variances, so they're one-off approvals. And I think what's changed is that as this becomes a more known about topic and people are expressing more interest, the regulators are also scrutinizing these systems more. It's gone from something that's fringe and doesn't come up often to, oh, this could be a potentially big implementation of these systems. So I'm finding that they're scrutinizing the same systems that we installed relatively easily years ago, much more now. And so I think it makes it challenging, but I think it's a good thing. And so hopefully with some of those precedents of these same fixtures, that they'll be more inclined to approve this bigger batch variance for the pilot.
I'd additionally add, having any sort of standard being met by a fixture really helps. So we've found in talking to the plumbing board, they really like that the Laufin Save has the EU standard to it. The Vostman fixture has no standard of testing, and so that has been a difficult issue. So knowing that there's like any standard, even outside the United States, that a fixture is met really helps with the variance process.
I just want to add to that too, that like water fixtures are more difficult at times to get variances for the plumbing board, just because most plumbing codes have to do with water. So I think when we're thinking about some of the non-flushed products, that is an extra hurdle as well of like, whoa, this is way different, there's no water kind of approach.
We have one back here, and then I'll continue.
Thank you. This is really important. I wanted to get back to the liquid gold comment of Scott Horsley and the being rewarded for diverting urine with the nutrients being valued that Brian Baumgartel brought up. I had interns working with me last summer, and they came across Cape Cod Commission data that approximately $6 million a year of fertilizer is purchased for residences on Cape Cod. Now, most of that fertilizer comes from petroleum for nitrogen sources and phosphorus. I think the majority of it is mined in northwest Africa, somewhere near Morocco. Very expensive. All this fertilizer is going up in price, like exponentially. And the USDA actually had an offer a couple years ago for U.S. generated fertilizer with pilot projects. I don't know where that went. But, you know, we really do have, if we can get above the important groundwork that's being done now, there really is a market for the nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients that are in our urine. And I think that when people ask our community, well, what are you going to do with this stuff? You know, what are you going to do with it? Well, $6 million is purchased at the nurseries on Cape Cod just for residences, not for the towns. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Yeah, this question is for Conor. Can you explain what the variance process is and who in your town or state entity grants that variance if you did want to put in a system that is not approved by MassDEP?
Sure. So the plumbing code is developed by the state plumbing board, but it's administrated at the local level by a building inspector or a plumbing inspector. And so if you want to do something in a regulated building that isn't going to meet the plumbing code, you can apply for a variance for that specific section of the code. And so there's a form and a fee that you submit to the plumbing board. You have to notify the local health inspector, and you have to document that you've notified the local plumbing inspector. You submit that to the state plumbing board. You have to explain sort of why what you want to do isn't going to meet the code. It's just the way it's worded in the application is that you basically have to explain a hardship, why why they should grant you that variance. So it can be very tricky for composting toilets, but we've successfully advocated based on the morals of the homeowner, like, and they've approved them that way. So you submit to the state plumbing board your variance explaining why, what part of the code you're not going to meet, why, and why it's a hardship, and then it's up to them to approve it or not. But that's for that one site. So that approval has no bearing on other applications, even if it's the same technology. That said, we have sought variance approvals, and it's very intimidating to go before the plumbing board. And we submitted a variance. I think it was for a full circle urine diverting composting toilet. And you need someone on the board to like make a motion to approve it, and no one was approving our motion. You're like, oh no! And then at the last second, the board's attorney kind of like brought up like, oh well, you approved that same system in a residence last year, and that somehow changed it. And so someone did wind up making a motion, and someone seconded, so we did get it approved. But it shows the importance of it's sort of conflicting concepts, but on the one hand, it's a variance is for a one-off approval, but the precedents seem to matter.
And then you have to take that approval to, and then once you get the approval of the plumbing board, then do you go to the town board of health, up to the town's board of health to give you the variance?
You just have to notify the board of health that you're submitting the variance. They don't have anything to do besides just notificate. They just get notified, and then the plumbing inspector is also just notified. But it's whatever the board's decision is. That's what, if they say yes, you can then list it on your permit and carry out the work.
That'll be the final question for this